access the channel in the right language. All right, I think we are already 40 people in, so I don't see any reason to delay further. Lazar, over to you.
Thank you very much, Darini. Good day, colleagues. My name is Lazar Popivanov. I come from the UNDP country office in North Macedonia, working within the Accelerator Lab team there. And it's a real pleasure to have been working with Darini and the team in IRH on designing this session. And we're looking forward to having a very, hopefully fun and engaging conversation on pathways to urban collective intelligence. So we'll just get started with the goal of this conversation. I'll talk a little bit about that. I'll introduce the panel, and then we have a pre-post survey that Darini is going to share with everyone before we enter into today's conversation. So the goal of our conversation today, I think, is very simple. We'll just try to answer the question, how do we bring more voices in the public discourse, particularly when we're talking about development challenges and development issues. And our focus really is on urban challenges. So what we want to do is explore how can we foster citizens' engagement and participation when tackling urban challenges. How can our organizations, be it UNDP or UN organizations, or generally our organizations, tap into, enable, encourage greater community activism on urban development challenges, while at the same time soliciting a more welcoming response from the institutions when that occurs. And finally, and I think this is the core of our conversation, we're going to talk about the concept of collective intelligence and maybe how we can use it to tackle some of the challenges that we know exist in our cities, where, well, we know our cities are facing. And what better timing for this session than amid a massive heat wave in Europe, isn't it? And this only talks about the development challenges that our cities are facing. And of course, the impact of climate change is just one niche, but also urban planning, redesigning and designing our public spaces, where we're really looking for a fruitful conversation today. And to help us answer these questions and to learn a bit more about them, we have an excellent panel of three fantastic speakers, starting with our colleague and friend Peter Baeck, from the director of, who's the director of the Center for Collective Intelligence Design at Nesta, the UK's innovation agency for social good. We have our colleague Alberto Cottica, who's a network scientist and environmental economist, but also he's our research and development specialist within the UNDP Accelerator Lab teams. Welcome, Alberto. And we have our former colleague and a very good friend, Justyna Linke, an expert in participatory urban transformation at Hyperlocal. And Justyna has specialized in experimentation. She's held multiple UNDP country offices with coming up with new methods of engagement. So hopefully today she brings part of that experience into the conversation as well. Well, we know she will. The format of the session today is very straightforward. Each of the panelists will have a total of 15 minutes to present what they would like to talk about. At the 12-minute mark, we'll come in with a quick follow-up question. And then right after their presentations, we'll have a 15-minute panel conversation and then a fantastic Q&A at the end. So make sure you stay up until the very end of this session today. I will not give you teasers and highlights about their presentations because I think I won't do it justice. So we'll just let the speakers dive into their topics. But before we do that, Darini, over to you for our pre-post survey for today's session. Thanks.
Yes, before we dive into our exciting lineup of speakers, we want to hear from you. We want to know, it doesn't matter if you don't know anything about collective intelligence. It doesn't matter if you're very new to it, but we want to get your opinion through a Menti poll. So I just shared in the chat the Menti link, or you can just do to menti.com with code 5222-9520. I'm going to just share my screen and we're going to be able to have a little conversation on what you think the prerequisites are to foster collective intelligence. So we want to see what you think. So you have a word cloud. Let me share other results real quick. So yeah, so we want you to tell us, what do you think is necessary to make collective intelligence happen or citizen engagement happen? Please tell us, don't be shy. Again, the Menti is in the chat. Yes, thank you so much. You can put more than 3 answers if you wish. So I see process. Oh, ownership is a good one. Thank you for sharing that one. Fun topic. That's good. That's actually very, very insightful. A lot of people need the fun, otherwise they don't get engaged. 5 responses. I see we have way more people than that in the chat, so please keep them coming. because we really want to know. So I'm going to ask you this question now, and we're going to ask you the same question after you heard from the three speakers to see if your perspective has changed or if you have learned anything valuable during the talk. Interviews with citizens, that's good. Data collection. I really like that we have things that are more process related and also things that are more conceptual, because I think it's a mix of both in the end that make it happen. Transparency, I love it. Understanding, trust is a very good one. I like that topic. Shared vocabulary, very interesting one, especially because we're happy to have this talk in Ukrainian and Georgian today. Sometimes having it all in English is not helpful. Very, very relevant point. Thank you for sharing. Study, ownership, solution-oriented, like it very much. Lazar, do you want to, or maybe any other speakers, if you have any comments, feel free to comment. I really like basic assumptions. That is a good one. It's a good one as well. Thanks for sharing that one. Leadership, ownership. So it's interesting because there's a lot of persona, there's a lot of process, and there's a lot of concept as well. I think you're already all very much knowledgeable of what citizen engagement and collective intelligence is. Thank you, 28 responses. Very happy for that. Thank you very much, everyone, for sharing this. I think it's interesting to have this picture of where we're at now. And then I'll ask again the same question after our speakers to see if we have some different insights. Thank you so much. Lazar, I'll let you take it away from there.
Thank you very much, Darini. So without further ado, I would like to invite Peter to share his screen and welcome your presentation, Peter. Nesta has been on the forefront of working on collective intelligence tools and really popularizing the tool as something, as a method of public deliberation. So I'm very excited. We've been working with Nesta as a part of our Accelerator Lab team. So I'm super excited for your presentation. And Peter, take it away. I'll be very diligent with time. So you have 12 minutes, buddy. Feel free.
Great. I'm starting my timer now as well, so make sure we count in the same way. Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. Lazar, can you give a quick thumbs up if you can see my screen? Great, thank you so much. Yeah, so my name is Peter Baeck, and I'm the co-director of the Center for Collective Intelligence Design within Nesta, as Lazar mentioned. I think I have kind of 3 jobs today. One is give you a quick introduction to what we believe CI is, and there are many different definitions out there, but our take, how we work on it, and then what I think that means for how we solve urban challenges. So just quickly, we have set up the center with this broad mission to create social impact by harnessing the collective intelligence of people and the power of digital technology. I think this is really important, and you'll see this run through my presentation. That's when you get this alignment right, then you get good CI. So what is it exactly? So collective intelligence is what we think is the enhanced capacity that is created when we work together, often with the help of technology, to mobilize a wider range of information, ideas, and insights to solve problems. And it's really good to see that resonated with many of the words you pointed out, they're really there from the work cloud. I would say trust, transparency, citizens, participation are kind of key features of all of our work. Within our work, we focus on these kind of 3 main kind of inputs that you have to leverage to make intelligence happen, and in particular around kind of how you bring in large, diverse groups of people and new source of data together. And that means that you leverage existing or novel forms of data, sensors, data science, social media data. You crowdsource input from citizens. So typically like crowdsourcing ideation platforms, citizen science, and so on. And then you use technologies like machine learning, AI, other methods to analyze and interpret that information. I don't have time to go through this today, but I think underpinning this is a set of like values and design principles we apply to our work, which is mostly around kind of ensuring that when we think about data collection, it's not about extraction, but about empowerment. So if you work with the community around taking their data, learning from them, it's also about communicating back to them what we learned and what that means for them to help them make more informed decisions, not just taking the data, running away and doing your work elsewhere. It's very important for me to say that we did not invent the field of collective intelligence. And as Alberto will come back to in this presentation, I think it is a concept that is as old as day. And to illustrate this, one of my favorite examples is that, the world's first dictionary, the Oxford English Dictionary, was crowdsourced, right? But it took 75 years to crowdsource around about 400,000 handwritten submissions from the English public. So when they spotted a word that they were assigned in a book, they would handwrite in this to the author. And by the end of the 75 years, he would have his dictionary. And that was the very first kind of crowdsourced dictionary. You know, modern day Wikipedia, you have an edit every 1.2 seconds, a new article every 5 minutes, I think. And I think that illustrates the fundamental concept hasn't changed, but the technology can kind of amplify our ability to do that well at speed and across lots of different national borders. And across our work, we have lots of good examples of how that happens in practice. So why would you want to use collective intelligence? There are many. I think the three kind of core values and opportunities we identify within collective intelligence is first and foremost, it gives you better data and insights. It just helps you understand problems better. The more you work with learning from new sources of data and data generated from citizens, you can fill those kind of gaps in understanding about the complexity of a problem, and it can help you quicker and faster respond to emerging issues and crises. Think COVID. Some of the best data around how to respond to emerging crises came from citizen-generated data and new sources of insight. Basic crowdsourcing principle, it can give you more people involved in solving the problem. So you just create more resource and capacity to solve a particular problem. And that's something we, of course, see a lot in kind of community activism and so on. But the main thing here is you can really use different CM methods to crowdsource and leverage that insight. And last but not least, by bringing in people to work with you, you create legitimacy and trust in the process. Again, coming back to the work cloud and what people flagged earlier. That means that often when making quite radical changes, for example, in how we adapt to climate change, by bringing the public on board in how you do that and what they want, they are also more willing to take the lead with you and try something new and make quite substantial changes to how we organize society or how they live their life. So we, as many of those here who work with the UNDP project on Accelerator Labs will know this methodology, but what we try to do quite early on in our work was to say that we have loads of great one-off examples like Wikipedia and other methods that kind of illustrate the potential in collective intelligence. But often we're kind of stuck at the case study and saying, I want more of that one thing. And what we try to do with our collective intelligence playbook is to say, well, it isn't rocket science, it is a design process. The way in which you understand problems, design new solutions, make decisions, and collectively and learn can all be understood through a collective intelligence framework. It's all about thinking about the new methods you can use for involving people, collecting data, and making decisions. And what the framework and the canvas do, and the cards you can see down there in the bottom right or left corner on your screen, are the methods we kind of work through with people to try and test out and develop and test these new things. The playbook is free. It's also open source, so you can download it and use it. You can also hack it and turn it into something else if you want to. Please have a look at our website. There's a link on my slide. Within our work, we kind of focus on four main things in terms of how we apply collective intelligence. First, we do strategic research. This is where we look at a method or a set of methods and apply to a challenge. So for example, what are the new opportunities to use in citizen science or crowdsourcing to how we develop community-based responses to climate change? And this is really just kind of frame and help organizations like cities understand the opportunity in these methods and how they can apply them in practice. We use collective intelligence methods to generate new insights. For example, and I'll give you an example in a bit around how we use citizen science to understand a complex problem in new ways and use that to, in this case, like lobby and try and inform public policy. There are many great tools out there that we can modify and hack and adapt to our work, but we also often identify a gap in the market. And we have designers, developers in the team who then develop new solutions to try and fill that gap. Again, always open source and free, so others can use that and repurpose it for other work. And finally, as you will know from our work on the Accelerator Labs, which I won't talk about today because so many of you are familiar with that already, we work with teams around the world and in the UK on helping understand how they apply collective intelligence methods to their work, test, develop, and experiment with new solutions. So a couple of examples of our work. So I'm about to finish up a big project with cities in the Nordics, Helsinki, Trondheim, and Gothenburg. And here we're trying to do what we call strategic research. So we're trying to basically answer the holy grail of democratic innovations. How do you move all these amazing stories of citizen assemblies and participatory budgeting from one-off pilots to something that's mainstreamed? And actually, this has nothing to do with technology. It's all to do with like how organizations share power, train their staff, make decisions, involve the communities. And what we try to do here is work with these pilots on understanding, actually try and scale up and grow. So for example, the way in which they use participatory budgeting in Helsinki, it's like what are the different internal processes that need to be in place to kind of make the most of these methods, and how can you apply them at scale? Basically what you're seeing on the screen is like the left-hand side of our analysis, which are all the barriers. These are all the problems. If you look at the report, there's a right-hand side as well, which is all the enablers. So the stuff you can do to address them. But that's an example of like the research we do would be typically working in a very applied way to understand how the methods that we care about can grow and scale, and what need to change in systems to enable that. This is perhaps one of my favorite projects. It's called, they're all my favorite, they're all my children, right? But Marketing Detectives was a project we set up to understand fast food advertising in the UK. And here we have this problem that young people get fast food advertising on their screens. They don't know, but we don't know what they're seeing because it's all driven by algorithms. So here we use citizen science to work with 600 young people on capturing every time they had a Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram advert, they would screen grab it on their phone, upload it to a database that we had created, and then we'd create this big aggregate analysis of like, what is this fast food advertising young people in the UK are being exposed to? And then that created certain novel insights around the problem. For example, that if you're from low-income households, you're twice likely to be exposed to fast food advertising, which is a real problem for inequality, but it helped kind of unpick what algorithms are presenting to our children online. And it's a good example of using CN methods to understand the problem, and then using that to kind of think about the solutions to that problem in the future. And last but not least, we just published our work on the strategy room, which is a whole new novel concept for engaging communities across the UK and identifying what kind of net zero policies we want here. So kind of moving away from this idea that there's a blanket net zero policy for the country, but saying different places have different preferences. Some people want more, less traffic, other people want less meat. And like, actually, can we kind of think about kind of understanding what local preferences are to get more communities on board? You can have a look at our website for that. I only have 3 minutes left, so I'm going to go kind of quickly into what this means for the smart city. And I think just like start with like the obvious critique, the way in which we tend to think about technology, innovation, citizens and cities is through this lens of the smart city. And we now spend the last 15 years kind of realizing it doesn't work, because it tends to begin with technology first. It tends to begin with lots of people sitting in a control room somewhere trying to design a solution for something without understanding what happens on the ground. Like the Toronto Cyborg Lab, basically a massive Google-funded project, is the example of why it doesn't work. Like they threw hundreds of millions after this project, created a beautiful visual master plan, everything automated, sensors everywhere. And after having tried for 4 years to make it work, the community revolted. They threatened to get rid of the politicians, and there was a massive backlash. And then they binned it. And now there's like, Toronto wants to kill the smart city forever. And it's a good example of like, if you roll out technology for the sake of technology without thinking about citizens, you're setting yourself up to fail. But on the flip side of that, in our work, and there's some great people in the call who do this, right? We know there are thousands, hundreds of thousands of great examples in cities of using different methods for engaging the public in new ways, on collecting data, solving problems, but they're often completely disconnected from the mainstream systems. They're not part of the kind of the dashboard mothership team sitting in a tower somewhere. And a lot of our work is thinking about, well, how do we connect these things back into the system to better work with the public on solving kind of challenges. And I'm not going to go through this list, but we know from our evidence and our research that when you do this, you lead to better decisions. Like you become more ambitious, you become more inclusive, you can improve institutional decision making, and you can increase trust, and you just create better public services. But the challenge is, how do you do it? Maybe I'll just give one example of one of my kind of favorite projects, not by us, but that illustrates this opportunity. So Barcelona, of course, is the front runner on lots of these different initiatives, but in Barcelona, they have something called the Office of Citizen Science. And it's an office within the city that leads on citizen science initiatives across the city. But one of their projects is this one called X-Air, and it's a classic air pollution study. But it tries to address this particular challenge that we know about air pollution in cities as a whole, but we don't know about very specific granular levels of air pollution. And actually, in a city, the variation on the whole street between air pollution can be quite significant. So here they want to work with children to understand, where do you hang out most? And can you work with us on identifying those places? And then can you install air quality sensors where you hang out? So we can really understand where children are. That's what we want to understand. We don't want to understand pollution across the city. We want to understand pollution where the children actually are. And so the children, we're going to work with citizen scientists on putting the sensors on corners, playgrounds, places where they were playing, collected the data, worked with scientists on analyzing the data, but most importantly, we're then given a mode for taking this data to the council to represent, saying, this is pollution where I am, where I live in my life. And to me, it really illustrates this kind of thing about connecting the method to the process, to the institution. Another great example, I'm going to talk about it, but to say there are lots of good examples out there, because I can see Lazar looking at his clock. I've got 5 seconds left. I think just finally, just want to kind of come back to what we do. Like, we are always really keen on kind of growing our portfolio of work on our network. So if you have ideas for how we can apply any of the ideas I just mentioned, just please get in touch in the chat or follow up with me afterwards about our work. I think that's straight on 12 minutes, Lazar. I hope I don't get penalized for the last 10 seconds. But so thank you so much. And I really look forward to hearing the other presentations and your questions.
Peter, that was amazing. I have a very quick follow-up for you. Mindful that Nesta has been on the ground in implementing these CI tools and CI methods of work, do you see any change in how people or communities or institutions respond to the process itself? Do you see some of the driving forces that support these type of activities or some barriers of implementation perhaps? Maybe reflect a bit more about your literally on the ground experience if that's...
Yeah,
if
so I guess
that's
I have the good news, bad news answers to that question. So the good news is that, you know, from when I started working in collective intelligence, 7 years ago, the field has grown from being quite abstract, quite academic to being very applied. And there is a kind of general recognition we need to do this and we need to do well. And particularly as we move into more complex challenges like climate change and the rapid kind of disruption it's causing to society, we need to get better involving the public in radical changes. The problem is that I just did a follow-up piece of work with a study we did on democratic innovations from 8 years ago. We looked at all these front runners like Console, Decidim, other tools, so to understand how they've evolved and what are they kind of experiencing in terms of their growth. And the one big trending answer from all those projects is that whenever things aren't working, the people who commission us tend to think of it as a technology problem. They don't think it as a power sharing or like an institutional problem. So it's like PB isn't working or the citizen assembly isn't great. It's a process question. It's about the thing. It's not about reflecting on, we need to fundamentally change our institutions to work better with citizens using these tools. The tools are just a thing that you get to at the end. Unless it's driven by like a real genuine need and ambition to work differently with citizens, you're not going to get there. So right now what we're seeing is loads of experiments with tools and projects, initiatives that are kind of starting to scale, and some cities have, like Barcelona, Helsinki, but most are kind of on that kind of early stage and still often default to, okay, now it's back to original politics, traditional hierarchies and structures. We don't want to play with that because that feels too risky. And I think for me, that's like the holy grail that we need to work on unlocking now. Sorry, that was kind of a but if but question.
That was amazing, Peter. Thank you so much for your insights and wealth of knowledge that you shared today. And our next speaker on the panel, just to remind our colleagues who might have joined us a bit later, is Mr. Alberto Cottica from the Accelerator Lab Network, who I believe will talk a bit more about the history, right, Alberto, the history of collective intelligence in our communities, in urban development. I probably didn't do it justice, but Alberto, over to you. You have 12 minutes.
Indeed. It's not exactly a history talk. What I want to do is I want to do a call to ancestors. It's a sort of exorcism. You know, Peter just cautioned us about getting things wrong and, you know, maybe overestimating the role of technology. And God knows that in the work of policymakers and their advisors, I'm looking at you, UNDP, and at us, in fact, because I'm UNDP myself, there is a kind of demand for doing that. And so as a result, we have a high potential for getting things wrong and leading the people that we are meant to advise into traps. And so I'm hoping that this sort of little ritual where we call to the ancestors of collective intelligence as applied to cities and urban thinking will help us steer clear of these pitfalls. And so let's start by cities. So possibly the greatest human invention. They've been with us for, 7,000 years, 9,000 years, depending on how you count. They are now home to most of humanity, and all demographic predictions say this will only accelerate. So it is already like a little sign of collective intelligence, and people are voting with their feet and moving into cities. And this is very likely to mean something. And this something is cities are here to stay, and we will very likely continue to need to intervene in cities. Cities have been, since the beginning, a seat of power and maybe the first place where what we call today public policy was made. This is because they tended to attract the attention of rulers, often to be the place where rulers lived, and therefore it was more visible to leave your footprint as a ruler from the city. And so even in ancient cities, from the code of law of the ancient Babylonians to the public works programs of Rome with their baths and their aqueducts, over to the sort of bureaucratic, ceremonial, political interface that is the Forbidden City in Beijing, then you can see how the cities have co-evolved with power and with a desire of rulers to intervene and to leave their footprint on the planet, on physically and also in terms of a footprint on history. And that has come with the idea that a well-intentioned, well-informed ruler could outsmart the collective intelligence, to use a modern term, of the people that lived in the city. You would look at a shanty town and you would think, oh, I can do better than that. Many times this was done with good intentions, of course, and the history is indeed full of examples where interventions have been tried. Some have been successful and some have not been so successful. There is an unusually high, higher than expected history of failures here, in the sense that problems that looked fairly intuitive on the surface have time and time again turned out to be quite wicked and indeed difficult to solve as the rulers and policymakers went in. So, in order to prevent ourselves from following in these, falling into the same pitfalls, into the same traps, let's call to the ancestors. And the first ancestors, first I want to call to Jane Jacobs. Jane Jacobs was an American-Canadian political activist. She's no longer with us. She died in 2006, I believe. And her urban thinking started during a political fight. She was a resident of New York City, specifically of the Greenwich Village at the time. And she became one of the leaders of a committee of citizens that opposed a plan to demolish Washington Square Park in order to build an expressway that would connect one of the other, the Manhattan Bridge, to the other side of the island. And this was not just like any misguided human intervention. It was part of a historically significant process in the United States called urban renewal, and which was, by the way, a progressive project. It was this idea that you had these slums, and the slums were not salubrious, and people were too crowded, and the health conditions were not good, and so you could do better. And the planners of urban renewal, their solution was to bulldoze the parts of the cities that they thought they were not conducive to healthy living, and relocate their populations into what in America are known as the projects, which tend to be high-rise, designed with rationalistic modernist criteria for sufficient space and light and air, and which, however, even though the idea made total sense on the face of it, turned out to be a bit of a disaster. Jane Jacobs pointed out, sorry, let me say why they were a disaster. They turned out to be a disaster because what you observed is that projects turned into dens of illnesses and crime and loneliness and lack of safety. And Jane Jacobs' explanation was, well, that happened because you tore away the fabric of social relationships that underpins the city. And when you do that, you no longer have a city. You just have atomistic humans, and all the social dynamics break down. In the sense, Jane Jacobs is an ancestor because she was the first to say a city is made of people. It's not made of buildings and streets, or only in the second instance. In the first instance, it is indeed made of people. Second, I want to call to Geoffrey West. Geoffrey West is a theoretical physicist associated with the Santa Fe Institute. So when we talk about collective intelligence is a term I strongly associate to complexity science. And this is sort of a complexity science trunk, main connection in my book. So West became famous because he studied the relationship between size and energy consumption, metabolism, in biological organisms. And he found that biological time expands as size increases. So larger animals live longer, move slower, burn fewer calories per unit of mass and time of the smaller ones. When he turned his attention to cities in the context of a project that started in the early 2000s, he discovered something astonishing, which is that cities, the opposite law appears to apply. So in cities, when size increases, socioeconomic time accelerates. So the pace of life is faster, people walk faster, generate more innovation per unit of time, incomes go up, crime goes up. So all of these collective epiphenomena of urban life are increased as the size of city increases. Both these relationships have a mathematically predictable behavior, which West and his colleagues have estimated. And so I cannot go into the fundamental biological reasons why the relationship between size and metabolism in animals is decreasing. But in terms of the city, West believed that in large cities, socioeconomic time accelerates because, again, of social networks. It's again the same thing that Jane Jacobs was saying. As you add more people, the number of potential relationships that you can have goes up and up and up. And since these relationships are the generator, the engine that generates knowledge and ideas, and in fact is the engine of the city, well, then this is why large cities are always sort of faster and more innovative than smaller human settlements. There seems to be no obvious limit to this. So West science predicts ever-increasing city size. Third, I want to call to James Scott. James Scott is an anthropologist, and he studied initially Southeast Asia, where he became fascinated by the idea that states seem to dislike people that move, people on the move. And then he published a very influential book called Seeing Like a State, in which he explained that statecraft at some point recognized the need for standardization. This happened during the scientific revolution in the 16th century, starting from the 16th century in Europe, where suddenly it was clear that states that were coming together at the time, the pre-modern states, they needed men and money. They need conscription, soldiers for the army, and they need taxes to finance the expenses of the sovereign. And they had, in theory, the power to conscript their armies and to levy taxes. But in practice, it was very difficult to understand who should contribute to what. Because as the tax collector and the recruiting sergeant went into the medieval village, they had an informational disadvantage. The people tended to hide their male sons, not to have them go in the army, and to fall back onto traditional patterns of usage of the land. Say, yes, this is my field, but in practice, I have to give half of my crop to my neighbor who contributed to me some favor 3 generations ago, and the trees on this same field. Actually, we do in this village, we do it so that the fruits belong to everybody, but the leaves, when they fall in the autumn, is the old women, they can collect them, and so on and so forth. We had these traditional patterns of land usage, and that made it very difficult to tax. And so early modern states reacted by imposing a standardized administrative order. Census, cadastral maps, freehold property on land, which didn't exist in Europe before that. And in so doing, they changed the territory. They really made it more simple because they had the power to do so. Scott then goes on to use the same argument to see how well-intentioned schemes to improve the human conditions have failed, making the same mistake. You take the some administrative order and you need it to monitor, to know how you're doing, to plan. Is the sort of today we need the data. Now, data need to be standard, otherwise we can't compare the past to the present or to the future. We can't compare different places. So we impose the same way of seeing, and if we have enough power, we also impose the same way of being. And the examples that Scott makes include things like Stalin's collectivization of agriculture in the 1930s. That was not very, in fact, well-intentioned, but also better intentioned things like the building of Brasilia in the 50s and 60s, the villagization in Julius Nyerere's Tanzania in the 1970s. All these things ended up failing spectacularly as patterns of use of a land and of living in cities, in the case of Brasilia, that had been sustained by the collective intelligence of many, many people interacting with one another, were superseded by the state's might. And eventually, this kind of never didn't come together. These schemes were dissipative, and they had to be shut down or sustained at incredible cost. Finally, I want to call to Adam Greenfield. Adam Greenfield is an urban thinker and designer writer. And the reason why I include him in here, even though he's relatively young, in fact, he's, I think, 2 years younger than I myself am, is because Greenfield wrote a book in 2013 called Against the Smart City, in which he tackles the smart city idea head on. And this is important for us to tackle on, because we would be tempted to say, well, yes, indeed, this idea of administrative order has been overrated in the past, but now it's different because we have powerful computers, we have electronic networks, we have pervasive data, so we can indeed outsmart the collective intelligence of citizens and design it from the top. And Greenfield attacks this idea by looking at the de facto smart cities that existed at the time of the book. New Songdo in Korea, Masdar City in the United Arab Emirates, and Planet Valley in Portugal. He compares the marketing literature of these places to the scholarship, the facts on the ground, and he concludes it's again the same thing. In fact, it's worse, because now not only you have to have a sort of administrative ordering in the sense of a cadastral map, but you even have this idea that the whole system is integrated from the sensors and the traffic light to the remote control that opens the key to your house. And if you have any experience with electronic platforms, you know that there's plenty of glitches, bugs, dependencies and stuff like that. This thing, you know, they sort of work, but they require constant patching and mediating and backs and forth. And you really don't want a bug in Microsoft Teams to control your pacemaker, let alone the key to your door, to the door of your house. So there could be many more ancestors, but I want to stop here. The idea in, and I want to leave you with this quote. Maybe could be a fifth ancestor, George Cowan, who was the president of the Santa Fe Institute in 1989. The Santa Fe Institute had the first brush with policy, and they concluded, this is not what we do. We are scientists. We are good at understanding things, but not so much at changing them. But in an interview to a journalist, the science editor of the New York Times, Cowan had the moment of inspiration, and he created this fantastic metaphor for doing policy, in which you're not the captain of a steamboat that can go up a river. You are on a paper boat, and you can, with 90% observation and perhaps max 10% action, you can sometimes put your punt in the river and move your paper boat slightly to the left or to the right in a position that is slightly more favorable. So this is a much more humble way to do policy, which I would like to leave you with. May this call to the ancestors help us preserve this humility and this observant aptitude, this laser-focused attention onto the social dynamics that the ancestors of collective intelligence in cities point us to. And with this, over to you, Lazar.
Thank you very much, Alberto, for the presentation. That was amazing, I believe. My question to you that we've pre-prepared, but I'm going to leave it for the panel discussion, is about your opinion about why the Accelerator Lab networks invest a lot in learning what communities know and can do in terms of climate change and responding to a climate crisis. But I'll leave it for our panel discussion so that we are good on time. But thank you very much for that presentation, Alberto. And over to Ms. Linke, Justyna. I know that your presentation talks a little bit about the success stories, but also the failures of using collective intelligence and citizens' participation. So we're very excited to hear what you have to say today on this topic. So the floor is yours, Justyna.
Thank you so much, Lazar. Let me just do full screen. I hope we're good. We're good? Fantastic. So first of all, everyone, thank you so much. It's a summer afternoon. It's lovely outside. So thank you for showing up and spending this time with us. As Lazar has mentioned, I will be talking today a little bit about examples of projects, activities, initiatives that use or generated collective intelligence, and specifically in the context of climate crisis, environment more broadly speaking, but also urban design and how we develop our cities. I decided to break them up or tag them along three categories that speak to who is it that we're collecting intelligence from, okay? And so the first one is going to talk about just straight community focused collective intelligence endeavor. Second one is going to talk about expert collective intelligence initiative. Third one is going to be about a mix of the two. And the fourth one will be something that I hear over and over again, and that is often an argument, quote unquote, against asking the public. So I'm going to share that one with you as well. So let's get to it. I see I forgot to put on my timer. So Laz, I'm looking at you for keeping me in time. Fantastic. So let me start with the example that goes out to public to really understand how they see the environmental issues and solutions in the city. This is a process that we did several years ago in partnership with a few organizations that basically provide or design all types of environmental solutions for cities. And together with two municipalities in Poland, we were looking into ways in which we can not only understand which of these solutions make sense for the city, but also how they could be modified, how they should be tweaked, so that they really respond to the hyperlocal context that we're in, so that they are well placed in the city and not just randomly or top-down imposed on a specific street or district. And so in that process and to meet that goal, we designed a game that was basically a way for us to engage people of many different backgrounds, many different age groups. So from teenagers, early teenagers actually, to the seniors in the city, from people working in public administration and business, to the people who are either stay at home or unemployed. So we tried to design a method, an approach that would allow us to harness the intelligence of the local community, make sense of it, and really build good, solid recommendations for the municipality. And so this is how the board game was developed. Again, it was quite simple to use, but it only worked if you had a very good moderator at the table who was able to really engage the players, gather their insights, nudge them to consult and create and provide feedback. And based on multiple rounds of such games, we were able to digitalize it, and based on that, provide recommendations to both the municipality that was interested in these results, but also back to everyone engaged. And this is something that I think we should be also coming back to in terms of tips and tricks and recommendations moving forward. So that's the first example. Now, a bit of a spin-off of that was a digital example, is a process that we did with North Macedonia. It was the time where North Macedonia was looking into updating their NDCs, nationally determined contributions, and the team wanted to engage the youth in that discussion. It's a technical discussion. In some ways, it can be really boring discussion. So we were looking into ways in which the local youth from both smaller cities, but also from the capital, could really engage with this topic and provide their feedback, again, built on what was done by the previous users and so on and so forth. And that's how we designed an online game that was pretty much a way for us to, one, harness valuable insights and inputs from the users, but also it provided us with a way to really get them involved in the topic, learn about different nuances of what's actually happening while we were doing that, and so on and so forth, which might be tricky otherwise, especially if you wanted to reach to many different places in a short period of time. And again, with this type of engagement, this goes back to also what Peter was pointing to, the design, how we design the journey of the user, how we make sure that it's not only extractive, but that it's actually a two-way street when we were doing the process, when we were designing the process, was super important. So these are the two examples of the community being the main player, if you will, in the process of identifying, modifying solutions, creating recommendations, unpacking what's really happening and what challenges are really to be tackled locally. Now, the second one that I wanted to point us to is the second example, is an example where we're looking into expert collective intelligence. And on the very first view, it might not be really collective intelligence in the sense that we had only 12 organizations in the room, but I'll come back to it in a moment. So the story of this one is quite simple. There is a big national NGO in Poland that deals with democratic governance. And as we see, climate crisis is really touching all of the areas of how we live, how we govern, how we function. And so this organization decided to endeavor on a journey where they would explore if there is a place for them to really engage in the topics related to climate crisis, and what that place would be. And to that end, we designed a foresight process that was based on a method called 3 horizons. And in short, the 3 horizons are versions of the future in which you unpack the old system dying out, the potential system emerging, and the innovations in between that either uphold the old one or help accelerate the new one. And so we gathered these experts from different organizations for that process. And what they were tasked to do was to go back to their networks and use the intelligence, the insights gathered by their organizations, their networks, bring them into this type of mapping, and then build on that to really identify some levers, some entry points that were interesting for everyone in the room to build on that. And so that's where we basically talk with experts who bring inputs from a broader public, from their networks, but in principle, who we have in the room are experts, in this case, on climate crisis, energy transition, and so on. So that's the second example. And now the third one, or the fourth one, sorry. And that's an example that is not our own, but I wanted to show it because I really love how it was structured and how it really pulled in many different tools and methods into one coherent process. That is a citizens panel that was related to the cost of energy in Poland. It was organized, designed, and executed by a foundation called Stocznia, which is shipyard in English. And what they did is they gathered 96 people from all across the country, from many different areas, many different backgrounds, city sizes, ages, genders, all of these. And again, they tasked them with one, processing a broader, larger pool of data, two, providing feedback to solutions that were provided to them from topic experts. And so the first phase was when the 96 selected panelists were pretty much educated on what it is that we're tackling in that discussion, where the different aspects of energy, the cost of energy, energy poverty, production, all of these aspects. And they were provided already with data sets that showed people's opinion about different challenges related to energy, many different survey responses, expert reports, right? So they were provided with numerous inputs coming from a larger public. And then they went into a deliberation process, which meant that they were actually working on specific solutions that were provided, put forward, pre-designed by topic experts, and they had the ability then to really tweak them, incorporate the feedback, the insights that they gathered from the initial inputs into these solutions and the design. And then finally, in the third stage, they were selecting the final ones that would be recommended moving forward. And this process was partially online, partially offline. Luckily, it was already post-pandemic. It's a recent example, but it's been extremely successful, and it's a good example of how a process can be really engaging and educative at the same time, and how you can use panelists, as in local experts, to really interpret, analyze, and translate broader insights coming from larger public. And now, finally, the one that connects to the title of my presentation, which is something that I hear often and over and over again when I'm referring to situations in which we're asking people the questions that I just mentioned to you. Where should we do it? What should we do? How should we tweak the solution? And so on and so forth. So asking the public, right? And what I often hear is this anecdote that goes back to Henry Ford, who, as you know, is the first mass producer of cars. And it says that when he was asked about this notion of engaging the general public, he said, well, if I asked the people what they wanted, they would tell me they want faster cars. Faster horses, and not cars, pointing to the limitation of the imagination of the general folk. Well, that's all good, but unfortunately, Ford would be asking, apologies, a very lousy question, right? So if you know how to design a process of harnessing and translating the collective intelligence, if you really know how to moderate a discussion, if you learn how to engage and draw the negotiations, the discussions, the conversation, you're in no danger of getting an answer, we only need faster horses. So with that, I know I'm over with my time. So let me conclude here. And again, would love to follow up and have some more discussion with you after the session as well. So feel free to reach out to me. And over to you, Lazar. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Justyna, for your presentation. I'm actually wondering, because you've had all of this experience working with different categories of people, but particularly younger people with gamification methods, foresight methods, collective intelligence tools. Do you see more enthusiasm, more engagement from young people when this is the process that is designed? And if so, why do you think that's so? Why do you think they're more inclined to respond positively to processes like the ones you've described, rather than the usual workshops and public participation tools that we have and know? Thanks.
Thanks, Lazar. I think the trick is somewhere else. We all like fun. We all like processes that are sleek and easy for us to go through. We all like it. I have plenty experiences of games for adults, consultation games for adults that worked perfectly, right? So we all like games, but I think what is super important, engaging with young people through gamification, through platforms, whatever that might be, is really being partner-like and connecting them with what is it that we're actually trying to achieve. Because very often we're super extractive with engaging youth. We say, here's the survey, go fill it in, and you get a whatever lollipop. And that's not how it works. They are smart. They are often way more educated than many of us in terms of climate. And so they want to be treated like that. They are experts in their field. It matters to some extent if we make the process gamified or not. But I think what comes first, and what is even more important, is that we really build the space for them to be part of something and actually lead something, than just being, extractive. And in that example from North Macedonia, this is actually in big part how it also happened, because it was the youth organizations that were doing the outreach and that were bringing friends on board, right? Because they had the ownership as well. It wasn't only the old Justyna talking, right? It was them. So I think it really comes down to creating a space to meaningfully engage and not just share an opinion.
Got it, Justyna. Makes perfect sense. Thank you so much. Peter, I saw you had your hand up. You have time to chime into this conversation.
Preach. I can agree with everything Justyna said, but I kind of say three things from my perspective on that question as well. Just one, I think, yeah, like meet young people where they're at, right? Like, you know, if you organize a consultation on the 7th floor of a council building, you're not going to speak to them. Like, you know, kind of first and foremost, like, it's not about gamification for me or like the method. It's more about understanding where they are. Gamification is a way to kind of drive engagement and like increase participation, but first and foremost, it's about understanding where they are. But I think another thing that's really important for me, and this goes for young people and anyone else that participate, like pay them if they spend a lot of time. You know, something that we really try to advocate for in our work. Often, collective intelligence is seen as like, well, you know, it's fun, it's engaging, you should give us a time, but sometimes these things require a lot of people's time and a lot of deep commitment. And it's almost like a job, right? And you know, you could be doing other things with this. And I think we should just remember to enumerate people and really credit them for their contribution as well.
Thank you so much, Peter. So we have two more things. And by the way, thanks to all the presenters today. That was remarkable. We have two more things to do by the end of this call. We'll open up the floor for any questions from the audience. You can either raise your hand if you want to ask a question or just drop it in the chat box and we'll pick it up from there. And we need to do the mini-meter and exit poll. But before that, I just wanted to kickstart one question just to get the conversation going. And this is to all three of you. Just looking ahead, mindful that we have UN colleagues on this call, but also colleagues from other organizations and just enthusiasts about this topic as well. What would your advice be, particularly for those people working on urban development challenges on using collective intelligence tools? And Alberto, I'll start with you. And if you can squeeze in the interest of the Global Accelerator Labs in this topic as well in the question, that would be amazing.
Yeah, that's actually quite easy, Lazar. I mean, I joined quite recently UNDP and the Accelerator Labs, and the really one reason why I did it is that the Accelerator Labs, in my opinion, have accepted this idea of deep listening. There is an ethos of deep listening, which is very concrete because each lab has a head of solution mapping, which tends to be somebody with ethnographic training. And among my ancestors that I invoked, I mentioned, okay, Scott is an anthropologist, and so that's you know, done. But also anthropology tends to claim Jacobs or one of their own, and indeed their methods were that of participant observation, and so anthropological methods. So in general, I think this is what can save us, this idea that you observe society in action and you don't think I can do better automatically, even though sometimes you can. You ask yourself first, why is this thing this way? You know, what is the inner logic? What does it look from their point of view? You know, this is this is for me the novelty. I've seen it before, but not with this determination in a large organization. Let alone of the public sector, and I believe this can save us as we move forward and in tweaking with citizens, as it's inevitable that powers that be do since 9,000 years.
Thank you, Alberto. And Justyna, you've had your fair share of experience in working with UNDP. So the same question to you, right? What would your advice be to colleagues within the system, but also outside of the system that work on this particular topic, right? On urban challenges and how they can utilize from using these tools. Thanks, Justyna.
Thank you. So I think I would have three recommendations. One is don't overthink it. So if your team doesn't have a really big experience in engaging with the local community, local stakeholders, really start small. Start with something simple that allows you to really get a taste of how this process works, how your local community responds to that, what's the dynamic, and so on and so forth. So number one, don't overthink it, just start small. Second of all, meet people where they are. And it goes back to what Peter also mentioned. We often organize these events, these sessions where we want to really bring the collective intelligence in places and at times that are unavailable to people, right? So it's the town hall at 2 p.m. on a Thursday. Nobody will show up, right? So really spend the time to figure out where each part of your local community hangs out, where they spend the time, what's the most convenient space for them, and really adjust that because the space builds trust. Your effort that you bring in, that you show your intent, this also builds trust, and it's extremely important in that process to really start it off. So second, really meet people where they are. And number three, and then it's something that we all suffer from, lose the jargon. Don't use collective intelligence. Just don't say to people that we're doing a collective intelligence exercise. Don't. I've learned that the hard way. I was when I started in 2014 with urban foresight, participatory urban foresight. I kept saying that we're doing a participatory urban foresight. I lost everyone at the very beginning of the conversation. So lose the jargon. Just make it as human as possible, because it's not about dumbing things down, but it's about not really overcomplicating and massaging our egos with the wording. So that would be number three from me. Lose the jargon. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Justyna. Peter, over to you. And just a friendly reminder to everyone on this call, you can either drop in your question in the chat box, or the method we prefer is actually raise your hand and we'll go to you. Peter, the floor is yours. Okay.
It's always good to be last in that question. Well, I completely, in spite of having characters in my job title, I agree with you, just get rid of jargon and use the language that works with people where they're at. I think maybe the only thing to add to those 2 points from Alberto and Justyna is, like, a lot of our work focuses on begin understanding the problem that you have, and if collective intelligence, or whatever we call it, can help fix it, and then if it can, which method is best applied to do that, right? So what we're seeing now, for example, is that in the UK, and I think across Europe and the US, people have seen the light with citizen assemblies as being the panacea, the solution to participation challenges. So it's what we do when we have a problem on participation and climate change. And citizen assemblies is an example of something that's a great method. There's 1 of 1,000, right? And it's more where you get fascinated by, and for me, there's an example here that being too fascinated by the one intervention and method, rather than understanding what is the actual problem I want to fix, and how can I work my way forward from that problem to find the right method or combination of methods and ways of working to fix that problem. And so I spend a lot of time kind of trying to dissuade people from going down the route, doing the thing that we understand the science, that's great, but it's not what you need to do here. And I think that is kind of, and it does a natural kind of inclination from particularly funders and policymakers to get the shiny thing, the new technology, they want to buy what the other cities got, right? And a lot of our job is to say, well, actually, that's not what you need. So I think that's kind of challenge number 1 for me, is that's where you start. And then I think the other thing is, don't overcomplicate it. And again, I think Alberto and I probably in similar conversations have kind of, I think that's both in terms of the language, ambitions, but also the technology that you apply. I think sometimes, there is, and I'm definitely guilty of this as well, there is sometimes a deep fascination with emerging technology, like AI, CI, what can it do, all these futures. And that's great, because we need to keep innovating and advancing in the field. That is a good thing. But we also have to recognize that a lot of the places, the people we work with, are somewhere else in their journey, right? And technology might just be simple crowdsourcing, offline, online combinations, really simple tools. And I think sometimes this kind of, again, this drive towards being the most innovative, experimental, might not be the most appropriate for just getting stuff done. So again, aligning on what are you doing? Are you experimenting and testing to be at the cutting edge, or are you fixing a real problem right now, today? And again, your decisions should kind of be influenced by those 2 trade-offs, I think.
Thank you very much, Peter. Darini, I'm going to hand the floor over to you, because we still have a large number of people in yes. We have 65 people on the call, so maybe it's going to be fun to do the exit poll at this point and just compare results and have a conversation about that as well. Feel free, Darini.
Yeah, very much so. So for those of you who joined us during the conversation, we had a question at the very beginning of this talk, and we're going to ask you the same question again, because we want to know if there's any takeaways, any learnings that you have taken from these 3 speakers and these questions. And it's also a way for you to prepare for this Q&A of yours. If you can prepare mentally the questions that you might have to ask. What are the things? So the link to the Menti is in the chat, menti.com, code 52229520. I'm going to share my screen. And then we're going to see if the word cloud that we have now is different than the one we had earlier on. There we go. So that was the first one. Let me move on to the second. Can you see my screen all right?
Yeah.
You cannot see my screen at the moment. Let's see.
We
We can see it, Darini.
Okay, good. All right. So a reason to connect, inclusive. So I like trust is coming again, and it's becoming bigger because I think trust is something that's like before, after, it's something everyone knows is required. I like the non-political burning issues as well. There's this sense of urgency that comes up. Youth, yes, we had a very nice chat about youth as well. So I think it's quite nice. Awareness, I think, wasn't mentioned before. So I like that we have things that are similar, but we also have things that are different. Sunny day. I like the person who said sunny day. Passion is also something we mentioned quite a bit. Reason to connect, I think that connects very well, that ties up with what Alberto was saying, with one of the pioneers, like saying, okay, connectivity, as cities become more fast-paced, more populous, you have more reasons to connect and all those dynamics. So that's really nice to see that, like a couple of new things, platform to collaborate. So you have a couple of new things that fun came again, so that's quite nice. Breakdown of barriers. If Lazar or any of the speakers, you have any comments to make on those words that are coming up, please feel free to comment.
Thank you, Darini. I'm just going to leave the floor open for a couple of seconds for any possible questions in the chat or from the panelists.
Yeah,
or from
as
the audience
usual.
members.
Yes, it's, as usual, we always love it when people can unmute themselves. It's the nature of those talks, the DNA of those talks, to have these conversations. So please don't be shy. This is a very caring community. Like, don't use jargon. That's a lesson learned. I think this is something we're all a bit guilty of, as Justyna mentioned. But yeah, please don't be shy. Raise your hand, and then we're going to ask you to kindly unmute yourself if you can. If not, the alternative is to put your question in the chat, and we'll be happy to have a few minutes of questions to make sure we address your concerns. Any reality of yours you would like to share as well. We're always happy to hear about any struggles or any challenges that you might encounter as well in your community. Just gonna stop the sharing, but thank you very much for sharing your insights on this.
Thank you. And maybe while we're waiting for any probable questions to come in, I wanted to comment on one of the points that was now in the slide, which was accountability. I remember in the first session we also had, in the first round we had transparency. I think something, and it applies to collective intelligence process design, but it also applies in general to citizen engagement. What we often do is we put a lot of effort into organizing the process of really collecting the inputs, but then we fail to redistribute them, right? So we use them, we consume them as owners of the process, municipality, NGO, whatever that might be. But then it doesn't really go back with proper intent to the people that we talked with. So we might publish a report, but imagine that we put as much effort into going back to the people that we talked with and discussing with them what we found out and so on and so forth. The result would be very much different, because what we're building in the process is a field of engagement, right? Rather than just a one back and forth for some inputs, some insights. So I wanted to stress that accountability, transparency, this is something that is at the core, I feel, of going back and really sharing what we've learned and thanking people for the time that they provided. Over to Peter, I guess.
It feels like we've been seeing it from the same sheet, Justyna. Like I agree with you, and I guess we talk about this kind of fundamental principle in our design around like data empowerment, not extraction, which was kind of insane. But I think maybe to add like the more like selfish slant to that in terms of your why you want to do that is also that in a lot of our projects, particularly when you think about like kind of citizen science, other kind of crowdsourcing initiative, I think it's a kind of a misplaced rationale, is that you kind of begin with the what can we extract from all these people to understand the problems, we can go and do our work elsewhere. But I think what we know from particularly citizen science is when people collect data, they engage with the problem and the issue, and they think about their own behavior, their community, and they have ambitions for doing stuff afterwards. And a missed opportunity for a lot of people who do this work is that they don't tap into that excitement or ambition, because they move on to like, we've got the data, we're going to do the problem now. But actually, particularly when it comes to stuff like air quality, like there are loads of kind of really interesting projects now, but the data is actually not that great. Like, the air quality data is kind of all right, and it kind of help you understand things a little bit. And like the example I mentioned earlier, what you really get is communities start thinking about driving your car versus walking, because you collect, like, the data is part of something you've done. The example I mentioned with young people earlier, we found that I think something like 2 in 3 of the young people who took part in capturing social media and data on advertising start thinking about their own food consumption choices, which is like Nesta's big mission, right? Like reduce obesity and encourage healthy eating. So I think just more like from how you design your project, like engagement is also about behavior change. And you can really help kind of build movement around that. And often it's kind of something that's not being taken into account when people design these projects. I see also like a lot of stuff from citizen assemblies, like once people deliberate and discuss the topic, they care more about like climate change, end of life, and so on, those big topics. So yeah, just agree with you as well.
Alberto, feel free.
Yeah, I wanted to take a slight detour by saying that the last part of this conversation has been a lot around participation, and I wanted to say that from a complexity science perspective, collective intelligence encompasses participation, but there is quite a lot of collective intelligent behavior that is non-participatory. Again, in an urban context, I remember about 10 years ago, a fantastic book by Stuart Brand in which he argued that provocatively that mega cities were one of the greenest technologies out there. As an old school ecologist, he say you want to reduce the environmental footprint of humanity, put everybody in cities. And by cities, he didn't mean, Ghent or Bologna, he meant Lagos, he meant 20 million people, sprawling slums. And of course, this rubbed environmentalists the wrong way. But he pointed to that, are pretty conclusive, that as people move from countryside to developing world megacities, fertility rate drops down instantly. First generation, you go from 7 children on average to 2. Parental care investment increases correspondingly. These 2 children, they tend to go to school, to high school. And so on and so forth. And so you have these processes that if you stop, if you don't try to decode them, they will look like a bad pattern of urbanization, unregulated. And instead, if you do look at them, you start to find inner logics. And then when you design your intervention, you might think about how to incorporate, to preserve these advantages that people are clearly seeking when we move to these slums, while still improving the sanitary situation and whatever. And all this, the signals, the people in question, they give it to us without participating. They don't go to workshops, they don't vote in polls, they don't even vote in the election. They just do what they do, and they do it in expressing an emergent pattern that is interpretable and is, I would argue, the product of collective intelligence, because these are many people coordinating to determine an output.
Thank you very much for that, Alberto. Oh, sorry, Peter, I didn't see your hand up. Go for it.
No, but it's a critique. Particularly, I'm given lots of, particularly by academics who study collective intelligence, which is that I think our focus is very much on like solving the problem and therefore creating a method that you like. So how do you use crowdsourcing to fix this problem, engage people in this particular issue? But of course, there's, as you say, like loads of kind of the emergence of CI, like in the social media landscape or in a city, the organic behavior, and that's a different field. But I guess the question back to you is like, the extent to which you want to try and like influence that behavior by design, to frame the physical landscape or influencing how people perceive information in the city, to try and influence how the organism works, like your ants and your bees and your swamps and so on. And I'm always kind of caught in between those two, like the extent to which you can kind of influence the organic behavior of a city or a place versus like very structured activity, like some of the examples that Justyna and I just mentioned. And I think the holy grail in CI is when you start getting the kind of that more organic, the swarm, the flocks to behave in a particular way.
Thank you very much, Peter. And with that, thank you so much, Justyna, Alberto, Peter, for your presentations, Darini for organizing and designing this session. And I think we can come to the conclusion of today's conversation on collective intelligence, particularly with a focus on urban development challenges. I'm sure that Alberto, Peter, and Justyna would really like to take your questions via email as well and have a broader conversation on it. So don't shy away from nudging them on different platforms and forms of communication. Darini, I'm giving the floor to you for last comments, and thank you everyone for joining in.
Yes, thank you, everyone. It was really lovely having this chat. I think it was a very dynamic one, and it's interesting to see that like your different expertise echo one another. So that's what's always nice. Next week, we're having the final urban talk of our summer series, because I'm not sure we're gonna venture too much into August. I'm gonna leave everyone for a break, but we have one on human mobility. And how do cities address human mobilities and waves of refugees, immigrants in a sustainable way? And it's going to be very exciting. We have quite a few speakers lined up. We're going to announce that later this week. So mark your calendar. It's going to be next week. It's going to be same time, same place. You're all going to receive an invitation by the end of the week with the official lineup of speakers. And stay tuned on our social media as well. You will have more information over there. So thank you so much for attending, everyone, and looking forward to seeing you next week. Thank you so much to Lazar and our speakers as well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.